when we were thinking about the podcast and creating something that was unique, but also authentic to us. Mm-hmm. So our background is that we came here very young.
Okay.
And our first language or native tongues is pretty much Spanish.
Sure.
And then we speak professional English, of course,
sure.
Because that's what we study. So growing up in the U.S., that's pretty much been our story here.
Friday Show, where every week we take a short break, try a new bourbon, and meet someone awesome from the St. Louis startup scene. I'm your host, Nick Niehaus, and I am talking to Junior Lara, who is the co-host of the Auténtico Podcast. So, Junior, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, excited to talk to you. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about the podcast to get started?
Yeah, so the name of the podcast is Auténtico Podcast.
Okay.
And it is a bilingual podcast focused on helping the Latino professional community in St. Louis. So we focus on Latino business owners and Latino professionals.
Okay, very cool. Now I was listening to some of it, and I have to admit I didn't understand some of it, right? Because it's English, it's Spanish, some Spanglish maybe. So tell me a little bit about the concept there of kind of blending the two languages for the podcast.
Yeah. So that was actually very intentional.
Sure.
So Gabriela Ramírez-Arellano and myself, when we were thinking about the podcast and creating something that was unique, but also authentic to us. Mm-hmm. So our background is that we came here very young.
Okay.
And our first language or native tongues is pretty much Spanish.
Sure.
And then we speak professional English, of course,
sure.
Because that's what we study. So growing up in the U.S., that's pretty much been our story here.
Okay.
So in discussing how do we serve our Latino community in St. Louis, but how do we create something that's unique to them that specializes in serving our Latino professionals? And we said, well, why don't we make it us?
Yeah.
Because we are Latino professionals, and sometimes in our conversations we're speaking English, and then we switch to Spanish, and then a little mix of Spanglish in there as well. Very cool. That's what makes it unique.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that we talk to people a lot about there's so much content out there now, right? And so you're always looking for ways to differentiate what you're doing, and this obviously is very differentiated. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, like I said, we wanted to do it kind of do something different, not just another business podcast that you can put on the shelf. We wanted actually for people to listen to it, to relate to it, to laugh, to learn, and to develop.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So how did you get into podcasting specifically? Because I've always been curious about it. We do our live show and whatnot, but haven't taken the plunge on the podcast. So is it something you wanted to do for quite a while? Have you always been curious about that particular medium, or how did you decide to get into it?
Yeah, so the medium actually came towards the end.
Okay.
The idea to want to serve our Latino communities is really what started the entire conversation. So I saw myself attending meetings, and I was the only person that looked and sounded like me.
Yeah.
And coming from New York, which is where I grew up, and then moving to St. Louis in 2003, I wasn't necessarily used to it.
Okay.
But then I also felt that I needed to be able to relate to someone that understood me, that understood my challenges, my backgrounds, and maybe someone that can mentor me too. So the idea came from, how do I serve someone like me?
Yeah.
Because I know there are more and more Latinos out there are looking to be able to identify with another professional. And kind of, the challenges are different too, just the obstacles as well.
Sure.
And then I started the conversation with Gabriela, and I said, I want to be able to create something to serve our Latino professionals. And she is the business counselor at the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Mm-hmm. So there's something that comes natural to her, looking to serve our Latino professionals. And we started the conversation, and then we came out with the podcast as the medium, because it's something that's very easy to do, it's very portable. But also expands beyond just at St. Louis City, for example. We can talk to Latinos all over the nation who can relate to our challenges, who can benefit from the discussions that we're having.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So tell me about what topics have you found have been the most popular so far on the show?
I would say one that's very popular is overcoming our own obstacles, or pushing beyond our fears, because we all have them. For example, for me, a big challenge was overcoming the fact that I have an accent.
Okay.
So not only do I have a Latino accent, but I've got this crazy East Coast accent on top of that as well.
Right, sure, yeah.
So there's two accents, right? So kind of feeling more comfortable with that, and pushing beyond, the fact that it may sound a little bit different to someone, who may not be used to that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it, when we touched on that topic, was really discussing look, we understand what that's like,
Yeah.
Here are some tools that you can use to overcome it. And that is, of course, networking with like-minded individuals who can relate, who can mentor you. We're really focusing on the fact that you have something to share.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously addressing things that are specific to your community,
Correct.
It sounds like you got to fit like a glove in terms of what you're doing. So that's
Exactly.
great. So I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of the technical aspects of podcasting, because I think this stuff is people are often curious about it, right? Because content's becoming really the way you market in general. So if you want to get attention for yourself or your business, you got to probably start making content.
Right.
So when you got started and you went to set up the podcast, what did you do to kind of figure out, what equipment you needed, software? Where did you start there?
So the equipment page was actually a lot like the easiest part of it.
Okay.
And that's because my wife used to have a podcast years ago.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
So
you cheated then. Yeah. That's
So we had the mixer, we
Yeah.
had the mics.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Yeah.
We had that. What we didn't have was the medium that we were going to use to put it out there to the world.
Okay.
And that's been one of the most challenging pieces so far, but still we've grown so much during the last few months that it's unreal. So for example, we decided that look, we want to make this fun. And if it costs a lot of money, it's not going to be fun. Because we both work full-time jobs and we want to make this very, very simple.
Okay.
So we went with OBS,
Sure.
which is a free software, a free platform with a ton of videos on YouTube that people can follow, just broadcast live. We also went with Audacity, which is a free editing software, which again has a ton of YouTube videos out there on how to edit your audio and stuff like that. And then with the website, again, it's just like learning as we go type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys are doing it all yourselves.
Correct.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you got all the software, which there is a lot of free options. Obviously, when it comes to the equipment, you had all that ahead of time. So I think one of the things I appreciate about this is the fact you said simplicity, right? So starting minimalistically, right? And I think you had a nice head start because you had some of the stuff already. But for the people that are listening, if you had to ballpark it, do you have an idea what it would have cost to maybe buy some of that equipment so people would know kind of what a reasonable budget looks like for this? Or?
Yeah. So I think that when we initially got the equipment, we probably spent about $200.
Okay.
And that's the exact same equipment that we use to this day.
Yeah, not
Not
bad.
a single thing has changed.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't cost much to get started,
It
right?
really doesn't cost a lot. And again, that was very
We
important.
talk about video a lot, and it's like, hey, if you're going to make video, just go live on Facebook on your phone first, right? Like, it doesn't require any money at all.
It's free.
Yep. You get it started. It kind of forces you just to do it because there's no, you can't, once it's there, it's done, right? It's on the page, right?
Exactly.
So start simple. I like it. Well, let's take a step back and talk a little about the community that you're focused on here, right? And kind of choosing to serve that community. We were talking about in St. Louis earlier. You mentioned something interesting, that the average Latino education level in the St. Louis area is quite remarkably high compared to the other people in town, right?
Absolutely.
So tell me about that a little bit. Yeah.
Correct. So St. Louis is known as a transplant city.
Uh-huh.
So the majority of the Latino adults in St. Louis have a bachelor's degree or higher education.
Wow. Okay.
So for example, something that we do on the podcast is we have monthly roundtable discussions.
Okay.
And during those discussions, what we do is we invite two Latino professionals to talk about their challenges, their businesses, or their careers, and then we kind of share some insight for other Latinos who want to learn and grow from them. And last time we actually had someone who had dual master's degree from Panama, correct?
Okay.
And also has his PhD in psychology.
Oh my gosh.
And not only that, he's also giving back to the community by developing a program that he put together. He was a professional boxer.
Oh, really?
So he implemented the psychology program into boxing to help kids relieve stress. Not just kids, but also everyone. Just relieve stress, kind of focus on growing and developing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, which is, it's insane.
Yeah, that's crazy background. I would love to meet that person. That's pretty boxing, multiple degrees, PhD.
Right.
So tell me about the round table a little bit more, because it sounds like, with all this especially highly educated community, that's a great opportunity for you to learn, I would imagine too, right? You bring these people together and you're sharing that knowledge. So that's once a month. Tell me a little bit more about some of the other people you've talked to there.
Yeah, so we actually had a lady who had a little bit of a different experience than Gabriela and I. Gabriela is the co-host of the podcast too. She moved here from Peru as an adult.
Okay.
And whenever she was telling us her story, She said from day one, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
So I had an opportunity to be able to go to school, to make friends, to learn the language, to learn the culture, which, I mean, unless you're from a different country, you don't realize that it's completely different.
Sure.
And just her tenacity to be able to like succeed, to want to integrate herself in the U.S. culture, to be able to develop herself, and completely coming and join this country as a professional adult already, and then join employee resource groups, and then help develop those employees who may have the same.
You got somebody watching and they're curious about coming on, or are you taking invitations, or how does that work?
So something that's happened with the podcast is that we realize that this medium, although it's completely new to St. Louis, and it may not be the only podcast that's bilingual for business owners and professionals, but it's certainly one that's getting a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And we have a ton of folks who are now saying, hey, you have the platform. I want to be able to come and tell my story.
Yeah,
I want to share my story. I want to share my challenges. I want to share my wins, because I also want to help inspire Latino professionals, but also raise awareness about the positive impact that Latinos are having in the community.
Sure.
And I think organizations are also seeing that now, because before the big drive was diversity.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's not just diversity, but also inclusion.
Yeah, gotcha. It sounds like it's a worthwhile investment
Yeah,
as well. Yeah,
for sure.
So what's the future of the podcast looking like? Do you have some ideas for upcoming episodes and whatnot?
Yeah, so we have our next roundtable discussion. It happens every single month on the first Wednesday of every month.
Okay.
And it starts at 6:30 on Facebook Live. So anyone can catch us on Auténtico Podcast on Facebook.
Okay.
And again, we come live the first Wednesday. Something that we've been discussing is also our next season.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? And we want to just kind of keep it on the down low, because we want to surprise everyone.
All right,
But
so doing some new things.
Yeah, I do encourage folks to follow us on Facebook. And we're on every single podcast platform out there.
Really? Okay.
We're Google, we're on iTunes, we're on SoundCloud, we're everywhere.
Easy enough.
Right, exactly. So I encourage everyone to follow us. But something that I want us to do as a podcast, something that our listeners, and if you're joining the Facebook Live, our watchers too are going to see, is that we're now looking at how do we partner with those Latino business owners.
Yeah.
And also how do we partner with those organizations who want to highlight maybe what they're doing for the Latino community. Because again, it all goes back to we rise by rising others.
Yeah,
and in turn,
great.
the entire community goes up.
Very cool. I love it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we got a few minutes left, so we got an additional segment here. I don't know if you've seen the episodes before, but Eric is going to join us, and he's going to tell us all about what we are drinking tonight. So, Eric, what are we sipping on here?
All right.
So this is JR Revelry, and the reason this is here is much like our guest tonight, life to own a bourbon brand. That was his drink. He wanted to own one, and through working through the spirits brands, eventually he was able to do that. Currently, they're sourcing and then bottling it themselves, but now he has his own bourbon brand, JR Jesus Ricardo, and so I just thought that was appropriate, because we have all these different people coming here and they're living out their American dream, right? And this was a perfect example of that.
I love that. I love that you picked it. Initially, I thought you picked it because my name is Junior. But still, great story.
Yeah.
Great story. I love it.
Great.
That's awesome. Well, Eric, as always, thanks, Junior. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And for those of you tuning in, we want to thank you for watching the Bourbon Friday Show with us here. We are at Kovo every single Friday at 4:30, so of course we want to thank Kovo for hosting us every single week. I want to thank EQ for streaming us through your Facebook page. We appreciate the help. And then this week we actually have a substitute behind the camera. So Michael Glazer stepped into Vanessa's shoes, and I'm sure did a great job. I'll see you later, right? But we really appreciate Michael helping us out on short notice and taking care of the production. If you are watching, please join us here at the event itself. We're here every Friday from 4 to 6 o'clock at Kovo. Thank you for tuning in, and please join us again next Friday at 4:30 for the Bourbon Friday Show. Thanks.
Salute.
Hey, thanks for watching. We truly hope you enjoyed it. Please like and share this episode, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out. To stay up to date, follow us on social. We are at Bourbon Fridays on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. See you next time.